Prisons can be some of the most dangerous places in any country. We're about to visit the worst prison systems in the world. Committing a crime that lands you in jail in any of these countries might be the last thing you ever do, as those who go in almost never come out. As we make our way through the nations with the worst prisons, you might be surprised to find that some of the most developed nations on the planet have made it onto our list. 15th worst prison system in the world. You probably didn't expect to find the United States on this list, did you? The United States of America has the most incarcerated people out of any country in the world. There are just over 2 million people in its prison system, which makes the U.S. incarceration rate about 629 people per every 100,000. These numbers are really concerning, and although the living conditions in U.S. prisons tend to be slightly better than in other countries on our list, human rights violations still occur. The United States prisons have many of the same problems as the others, especially when it comes to gang and racially motivated violence within the system. There are rarely enough guards, and even when a prison is fully staffed, it doesn't stop the violence that occurs. This is a systemic problem both in the US and around the world. The US also doesn't have a great track record of providing inmates with mental health disorders the help they need. This shouldn't be in the general population, but this is often where they end up anyway. Abuse of power is also a problem in some U.S. prisons. Take Rikers Island, for instance. This detention facility in the New York City borough of Queens is made up of 10 different jails that house men, women, and youths. It was uncovered that the guards at the facility were running an underground operation where they would have certain inmates attack other prisoners who were giving them problems. The United States also uses solitary confinement pretty liberally with inmates. Solitary is widely accepted to violate human rights standards. Yet at Rikers and across the nation, prisoners find themselves in solitary confinement for disciplinary actions even if they have a mental health disorder. The main problem with the United States prison system is that many facilities are privately owned and operated, which leads to corners being cut at the expense of prisoners' rights. Even in state-run facilities, however, there are practices that are outdated. The United States is the third most populous country on the planet, has the highest GDP out of any nation, and boasts about its freedom to anyone who will listen, yet it puts more people in jail than any other nation in the world. Let that sink in for a moment. The next country on our list should come as no surprise at all. In fact, you'll probably be shocked that it's not number 1. 14th worst prison system in the world. Singapore is a city-state with a massive amount of wealth relative to its size. However, having a lot of money doesn't mean their prisons are luxurious. You can get thrown in jail for something as simple as jaywalking or littering in Singapore, and once you're in the system, it's incredibly hard to get out. Singapore is consistently ranked as the 7th worst justice system in the entire world. It is slow, and someone can be thrown in jail for the smallest offense. Once in a Singapore prison, it's not uncommon to be abused by the guards and even punished through bamboo stick lashings. Human rights organizations have brought these practices to the world's attention through high-profile cases, yet there seems to be little reform within the prisons themselves. The liberal use of corporal punishment along with how easy it is to find yourself in Singapore's prison system are the main reasons why it made the list. This next country is one you probably can't point to on a map. In fact, you might not even know what continent it's a part of. 13th worst prison system in the world. Benin is a country in Western Africa that sits between Togo and Nigeria. It is not a wealthy nation with a GDP of around $15.65 billion as of 2020. A lack of resources means that certain social programs are underfunded. In Benin's case, this includes the prison system. What makes it so terrible is that everything moves incredibly slowly. People who are arrested find themselves stuck in prison for years while awaiting their trial. There is no option other than to wait in a cramped cell with other offenders until the judicial system eventually gets around to your case. While you wait your hearing or after you're convicted, you'll find yourself in a prison that is over capacity by around 300%. The detention facilities themselves are bursting at the seams, with inmates having to share cells with multiple other people, even if there are not enough beds for everyone. An example of this is Cotonou Prison. It was originally designed to hold 400 prisoners, but now contains over 2,000 inmates at any given time. With the prisons in Benin being so obscenely over capacity, disease and illness run rampant. Inmates regularly become sick while awaiting trial, and since this process can take years, many die in prison before they even get a chance to get out. Torture is fairly common in this next prison system, which is why you definitely don't want to be arrested in this country. 12th worst prison system in the world. Georgia, the country, not the state, uses some questionable practices in its prisons. Human rights organizations found that torture was regularly practiced on inmates in the system. In 2012, video footage of inmates being beaten and sexually assaulted by prison staff at Gladani Prison was uncovered. This video led to mass protests in the country and outcries for the government to reform the system. This led the government to issue a zero tolerance for violation of human rights policy for the prisons, but it isn't clear just how much actually changed over the years. Living conditions are still brutal inside some Georgian prisons. and human rights abuses have continued even after reforms were put in place. It's the heavy-handed tactics that prison guards use to extract information and keep inmates in line that make the prisons in Georgia so dangerous to be in. 11th worst prison system in the world. Indonesian prisons tend to be overcrowded and poorly maintained, but this isn't the only reason this country made the list. In a recent survey, it was found that Indonesia's legal system was the most complicated to navigate in all of Asia. This complexity means that people often fall through the cracks and get left in prison for much longer than they should. Indonesian prisons tend to be run under harsh rule that uses corporal punishment as the main method for keeping order. In fact, some regions of the country still follow Sharia law, which means that certain crimes committed inside and outside of prison, such as drug smuggling, are punishable by death. If an inmate's caught with drugs in the prison walls, there is no investigation needed. They're immediately executed for their crime, oftentimes by hanging. To be clear, this is not true for every prison in the country, but the fact that immediate judgment is passed for certain broken rules makes Indonesian prisons a dangerous place to be. This next country has a huge population and a huge problem with prison brawls within its system. 10th worst prison system in the world. India is a large country with a lot of people. This means it needs to have a lot of prisons to deal with lawbreakers. Unfortunately, countries with large populations tend to struggle with the upkeep of some services just because of the sheer number of people who use them every day. One of the biggest problems in India is maintaining clean, up-to-date detention facilities to house criminals. The prisons in India are overcrowded and understaffed. Large complexes that were built decades ago have become run down and outdated. One prime example of this is Arthur Road Jail in Mumbai. Arthur Road Jail is known for gang wars that rage within the prison itself. Since there aren't enough staff to control the population, these brawls can lead to serious injury and even death for some of the inmates. The guards who try to break up the fights are often injured, making this prison system dangerous for everyone involved. The overcrowding also means the spread of disease gets out of hand very quickly. If someone becomes infected with a virus or bacterial infection, it doesn't take long before the disease spreads throughout the inmate population. During the COVID-19 pandemic, this ended up being a huge problem in prison systems around the world. In India alone, thousands of inmates died as a result of how quickly the virus spread through the crowded facilities. You can be thrown in jail in this next country without even being told what you did wrong. 9th worst prison system in the world. Nigeria in general struggles with human rights violations. In fact, militant groups such as Boko Haram and ISWAP still terrorize citizens and abduct large numbers of people every year. With so much chaos happening throughout parts of the nation, you can only imagine how terrible the prisons are. The craziest thing about Nigerian prisons is that 2/3 of all inmates are there without even being charged with a crime. If you're detained in Nigeria, law enforcement does not need to tell you why you're being arrested before throwing you in jail. This obviously has serious consequences for the prison system. They're overcrowded and filled with people who might be innocent. It can take up to a decade before your case is even heard by a judge, which means you have to fight to survive for years in the terrible prison conditions just to find out what you did wrong. Not everyone in Nigerian prisons are wrongfully put there. Extremists who have committed countless atrocities might be in the same cell as someone who has never broken the law in their life. It's not only an incredibly unfair system, but an extremely dangerous one as well. We're now entering the worst of the worst. 8th worst prison system in the world. Argentina has made a lot of progress throughout the years. However, the prison system in this South American country is still pretty rough. Many prisons are way over capacity, and some prisons, like Mendoza Prison, 5 inmates can be crowded in a single cell that was meant for only 2. Depending on where the prison's located, there might be no running water or sewage system, which means that inmates are forced to use plastic bags and bottles to do their business. Obviously, this is not very hygienic, especially when the cells are over capacity and can lead to disease and illness spreading rapidly within a cell block. It's reported that there are very few medical staff available in the prisons of Argentina, and at some facilities, the only time a prisoner will ever see a doctor is if they die. In some prisons, the inmates sleep on cold concrete floors because there are not enough beds to go around. With so much discomfort, riots are not uncommon. This is dangerous for the prisoners and the guards. Whenever the prisoners rebel, people die. The prison system in the country has a long way to go, and with every year that passes, the prisons get more and more crowded. Our next prison system is not only the 7th on our list, but has the 8th highest rate of incarceration in the world. 7th worst prison system in the world. Thailand's incarceration rate is around 445 inmates for every 100,000 people, but the high incarceration rate is not the most surprising thing about the prison system. In certain facilities, the inmate population is divided into classes. If you find yourself in a lower class, you could be doing the chores for the upper class inmates in exchange for food and basic necessities. This leads to all sorts of problems within the prisons, such as people being taken advantage of and terrible working conditions for the lower class of prisoners. The reason this structure developed is that in some prisons, the only way to get enough food to survive is to buy it from the commissary. The only free food served every day is a bowl of rice or soup. If inmates want something else to eat, they need to purchase it. However, only the wealthy inmates can afford to do this. It's been reported that the meals served by the prisons often contain spoiled food with maggots in it, which makes the food practically inedible. Another problem with the class system in Thai prisons is that crimes such as stealing and mugging happen constantly. The guards rarely intervene in these circumstances, which makes life in these prisons not only miserable but dangerous. The conditions of many Thai prisons do not meet basic health standards, especially if you find yourself in one of the lower classes. This next prison system is known for being brutal, to the point where anyone who ends up in jail expects to be seriously hurt or die there. 6th worst prison system in the world. The oppressive regime in Syria commits human rights violations daily. People are killed in public by the government, which is a good indication that what happens in their prison system is truly terrible. Many of the prison facilities were built over 50 years ago, and some date back to the 1930s. This means the system is literally falling apart. Guards in Syrian prisons regularly torture and abuse the inmates. Fear and pain are used daily to keep prisoners in line. One Palestinian writer named Salameh Khaleh wrote about his time in one of the worst prisons in Syria, called Tadmur prison. He recounted that the prisoners were stripped of their basic human rights and abused by the prison staff. He was tortured and beaten within inches of his life. Tadmur was recently destroyed, but the atrocities seen at the prison still happen at other facilities across the country. Perhaps one of the scariest parts of being in a prison in Syria is that if there's a shift in power, you never know what the next ruler is going to do. In the past, hundreds, even thousands of prisoners have been slaughtered by military personnel for opposing the current leadership or because of their beliefs. One Syrian prisoner who made it out alive said, "When death is a daily occurrence, lurking in torture, random beatings, eye gouging, broken limbs, and crushed fingers, wouldn't you welcome the merciful release of a bullet?" It seems that being a prisoner in Syria might be worse than death. We're now in the top 5 countries with the worst prison systems in the world, and this next one will shock you. 5th worst prison system in the world. Venezuela can be a rough country to be in. There's corruption within different parts of the government, but this problem is particularly bad within the legal system. It's estimated that the prisons in Venezuela are currently 250% over capacity. This has created unsafe conditions within detention facilities, as there are just not enough staff to control such a large population of inmates. La Sabaneta prison was one of the worst facilities in the entire world. In 2013, the inmates rioted as a result of poor living conditions and human rights violations. Around 160 inmates lost their lives during the prison break. This just goes to show how terrible life in Venezuelan prisons can be. But this isn't an isolated incident. The terrible conditions within Venezuela have led to human rights organizations condemning the system as a whole. Gang violence is a huge problem in Venezuelan prisons. Rival gang members use improvised weapons to disfigure and even kill one another. Again, this isn't just isolated to one prison, but seems to be the norm. In some facilities, rival gangs get placed in the same cell blocks, even though the outcome is inevitably going to be violence and death. Venezuela has one of the highest homicide rates in the world, both inside and outside of its prisons. You can't rely on the understaffed guards to protect you in a fight if it breaks out, and you will likely be stuck in the system for years, as the overcrowding of the prison system is getting worse and worse. Having one guard for every 150 inmates is not out of the norm in Venezuelan prisons, and some officials even claim that around 80% of the facilities in their system are actually run by armed inmates. 4th worst prison system in the world. Living in North Korea is like living in one big prison. For many North Koreans, they might not be detained, but they just feel like prisoners within their own borders, and Kim Jong-un is the abusive warden. Yet, even though the living conditions for many in the country are awful, being in North Korea prison is a real-life nightmare. Camp 22, also known as the Hwoyeong concentration camp, was shut down in 2012 after egregious human rights violations and corruption were uncovered there. However, all those prisoners were then sent to other facilities where the conditions weren't much better. There are reports of human experimentation along with torture and abuses of all kinds within the North Korean prison system. Inmates in North Korea constantly live in fear, as the judicial system isn't based on fairness but the whims of those in power. They could be doing back-breaking manual labor one day and hung the next without any sort of trial or warning. If someone becomes injured, it's highly unlikely they'll get to see a doctor. If they do end up on the operating table, it'll be with an inexperienced med student who's only there to practice the procedure before conducting them on the general public. Being in a North Korean prison is like being a guinea pig in the most dangerous cage in the world. We're warning you now. The top 3 worst prison systems in the world are absolutely brutal, so be ready for some insane facts. 3rd worst prison system in the world. China is the most populous country on the planet with close to 1.5 billion people within its borders. This means no matter how many prisons are built, they will always be overcrowded. Right now, it's difficult to say just how terrible the conditions are in China because of restricted access by the state, but horror stories of people who have survived Chinese prison and escaped the country are absolutely terrifying. Human rights abuses run rampant. These structures are dated and not well maintained. Oftentimes, inmates are living in their own filth as prisons are overlooked by the government and not a top priority for repairs. Illness passes through the population like wildfire, and very little medical attention is given to inmates as the prisons just don't have the staff to support the number of people incarcerated. The worst of the worst is the Urumqi No. 3 detention center in Dabancheng. Although China calls this a prison, it's more of a concentration camp. China claims that this is just a normal prison, but it has been found out to hold only Uyghur Muslims. The Chinese state has made it clear using no uncertain terms that they do not want the Uyghur Muslim people within their borders, and it appears they're taking a genocidal approach to getting rid of them. Urumqi No. 3 is over 220 acres in size and holds around 10,000 inmates, almost all of which are Muslim. In 2019, an additional 9 miles of buildings were constructed at the prison to hold more individuals. Most of them within its complex haven't been arrested for any crime except being a Muslim. They're tortured using numerous methods, a favorite of which seems to be electric baton, as one teacher who worked at the facility reported. Pretty much every single right a human has is violated at Urumqi No. 3 detention center. It's full of pain and suffering. This might be the worst prison in China and perhaps the world, with the entire system being run by the ideologies of the state. This means that if you disagree with the people in power, you'll find yourself in prison and could disappear without a trace, and no one would ever know what happened to you. Second worst prison system in the world, Russia. Need we say more? Probably not, but we will. The largest country in the world has some of the largest problems in its prison system. If you find yourself in a Russian prison, it likely means you will be underfed, freezing all the time, and stuck there until you die. Overcrowding in Russian prisons seem to be a huge problem. Facilities that were designed to have only 10 prisoners per cell end up with 10 times that many. This might be somewhat beneficial as more body heat might keep inmates from freezing to death, but it also leads to all kinds of other problems such as terrible hygiene and constant fights over space to sleep. Tuberculosis and HIV are two prevalent diseases in the Russian prison system, both of which could be mitigated with medicine and proper distribution of inmates. However, neither of these things seem to happen in Russian prisons. In some Russian facilities, inmates who can't be with the general population spend every day of their sentence in cages. There's no recreation, no interaction with other people, and no way to pass the time other than with their own thoughts. This has led to a very high rate of mental breakdowns and disorders developing in the inmate population. The guards at all the detention facilities are vastly outnumbered by the prisoners due to overcrowding and improper staffing. This has led to guards resorting to brutal tactics to keep the inmates in line. Torture is common. Inmates can be dragged out of their cells just to be whipped or beaten to get a point across. Human rights organizations are not granted access to these prisons, and anyone who speaks out against the conditions in them is likely to find themselves behind bars at the hands of the Russian government. The harsh treatment of inmates and the abuses of prison staff make Russian prisons some of the worst in the world. The worst prison system in the world is in the country of Rwanda. It ranks second in the world for incarceration rates at around 580 inmates per every 100,000 people. Rwanda is also home to the most crowded prison in the world. It's Muhanga Prison, formerly known as Gitarama Prison, and perhaps the best showcase of this. The facility has over 7,000 inmates within the walls, but was originally designed to hold only 400. Many of the people in this and other prisons in the country took part in the Rwandan genocide. Finding yourself in a Rwandan prison could put you face to face with some very dangerous people. Due to the overcrowding in the prisons, cells are rarely used. Instead, inmates are contained within larger rooms and the courtyards of the facilities. If a fight breaks out, it's unlikely the guards will be able to break it up before someone is seriously injured or killed. The hygiene within the prisons is terrible because so many people are packed in tightly together. There's a full-time doctor at the larger prisons, such as Gitarama, but the main responsibility is to amputate limbs that have become infected with gangrene from open wounds and unsanitary conditions. The floors can be covered in feces, which exacerbates the problems of bacterial and fungal infections. The smell of some of the more crowded Rwandan prisons is so horrendous that it can be smelled for miles. It's reported that around 1 in 8 prisoners dies from either disease or violence in the Rwandan prison system each year. Now watch 50 things nobody tells you about being in prison, or check out what happens in the H unit at Federal Supermax Prison.